What would you do if an HOA showed up by boat and claimed your entire island didn't belong to you anymore? I bought a quiet island on the lake looking for peace. 3 days later, an HOA arrived by boat with documents claiming my home didn't belong to me. They thought I'd panic. They thought I'd sign. What they didn't know was that every threat, every demand, every step they took was leading them straight into the biggest mistake of their lives. The first sound wasn't the helicopters. It was the water. A deep, hollow slap echoed up from beneath the dock as waves struck the pilings harder than they ever did at this hour. Normally, the lake lay calm in the early morning, its surface smooth enough to mirror the sky. Today, it churned in fractured patterns of turquoise and white, sunlight scattering across it like broken glass. The air felt thicker, charged, vibrating faintly against my skin. Then the shadows came. They swept across the island in long, rushing bands, over the pine trees clinging to the rocky slopes, across the gravel drive, sliding up the face of the modern house perched on the low hill. The shadows crossed me next, stretching my own silhouette across the dock like a warning. A half-second later, the sound arrived in full force. Helicopters. Not one, several. The noise wasn't just loud, it was physical. It pressed against my chest, rattled the metal cleats, set the loose ropes humming like low strings on a bass. The smell of fuel mixed with lake air and sun-warmed wood. Gulls scattered upward, crying sharply as the rotor wash tore through their flight paths. I stood still at the edge of the dock, boots planted on planks silvered by decades of weather. The wood beneath me was solid, old-growth timber, carefully maintained, still faintly carrying the scent of fresh sealant from repairs I'd finished the day before. My hands hung loose at my sides. No clenched fists, no raised voice. Across from me, Bethany Reed was unraveling. She stood several yards down the dock, near the point where the marina slips opened out toward deeper water. Her bright pink suit, tailored, expensive, unmistakably deliberate, looked violently out of place against the blues and grays of the lake. The wind whipped at her jacket, snapping it open, tugging loose strands of perfectly styled hair and slapping them against her face. Her mouth was open in a scream. I couldn't hear the words over the helicopters, but I didn't need to. Her expression said enough. Rage, panic, disbelief. One arm was thrust forward, finger locked on me, as if she could pin the entire situation in place through sheer accusation. "This is HOA property," she shouted, again and again, her voice lost in the thunder overhead. "You don't have the authority. You can't do this." Behind her, the scene had turned unmistakably real. 2 patrol boats eased into position on either side of the white luxury yacht she'd arrived in that morning. The yacht's engines were silent now, its bow nudged gently by the water, as if confused by the sudden loss of control. Farther out, a Coast Guard cutter held steady, broad and immovable, its presence less dramatic than the helicopters, but far more final. 6 hours earlier, the island had been quiet. 6 hours earlier, none of this existed. That morning had started the way the last 2 had, slow, almost unreal in its calm. A thin veil of fog clung to the surface of the lake, curling lazily around the marina slips, before retreating under the rising sun. I'd stepped onto the dock with a mug of coffee in my hand, steam drifting upward as I watched light crawl across the water. It was my 3rd day on the island, 3rd day of ownership, 3rd day of walking the property line, learning the way the wind bent around the trees, the way the lake darkened suddenly near the old boat ramp where the depth dropped fast. I was still settling into the idea that this place was mine. That was when the first boat appeared. A white twin-engine cruiser cut straight toward the dock, ignoring the radio channel, ignoring courtesy. It didn't slow until it was already alongside, lines thrown with the ease of someone who'd done this before. Here. Bethany Reed stepped off before the boat was fully secured. She moved quickly, decisively, heels clicking against dock boards never designed for them. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed, clipboard tucked beneath her arm like a symbol of rank. Behind her followed a small procession. 2 men in matching navy blazers, a photographer already raising a long-lens camera, and another man in a uniform that looked official enough to pass at a distance. She didn't look at me at first. She walked the dock instead, gesturing sharply, pointing at cleats, at the marina office door, at the locked gate leading up the gravel path toward the house. The photographer followed her movements, shutter clicking rapidly, framing angles that made everything look cramped, crooked, non-compliant. Only after she'd catalogued the dock like a crime scene did she turn to face me. "You must be the new owner," she said, her smile tight, professional, empty. "Bethany Reed, president of the Coastal Estates Homeowners Association." The words landed wrong, heavy, out of place. She opened her leather folder and removed several sheets of paper, thick stock meant to feel old and important, artificially aged edges, seals pressed deep enough to look authentic, dates written in a font designed to imply authority. "According to these records," she continued, voice carrying just enough to sound official, "this island and its marina fall under HOA jurisdiction. You are currently occupying community-controlled property." For a moment, I didn't answer. I looked past her instead, out across the lake. The water stretched wide and open, the far shore a hazy green line beneath the sky. Islands don't feel like something that can be claimed with a clipboard. "I bought this land legally," I said finally. "I have the deed." She waved that away as if it were a minor inconvenience. "That will be addressed. For now, all activity must cease. There are unpaid fees, compliance violations, inspections that need to happen immediately." She named the numbers deliberately. Large enough to shock. Back fees, monthly assessments, marina usage charges, designed to intimidate. I didn't argue. I didn't pull out my paperwork. I listened. Because something about the entire scene felt wrong. It wasn't just the documents. It was the way she said the word community, as if repetition could make ownership real. It was the man in uniform who wouldn't meet my eyes. It was the photographer framing shots from angles meant to distort reality. When I asked simple questions, parcel numbers, recorded easements, statutory authority, her smile tightened just enough to crack. "You'll have 72 hours, she said sharply. "After that, enforcement escalates." Then she left as abruptly as she'd arrived, entourage retreating to the cruiser like a practiced unit. Now, hours later, she stood frozen under the roar of helicopters, her imagined authority collapsing in real time. I didn't move when the first boots touched the dock behind her. I didn't speak when a commanding voice cut through the chaos and the shouting stopped. I simply stood there, calm, watching the difference between power claimed and power proven. And as Bethany Reed slowly turned, eyes wide, finally realizing she was no longer in control, one question echoed louder than the rotors overhead. What authority could possibly justify an invasion like this? The answer didn't begin with helicopters. It began 3 days earlier, with paperwork, patience, and a decision that had taken me nearly a year to make. 3 days before Bethany Reed ever set foot on my dock, the island had been nothing more than a quiet shape on a survey map spread across my kitchen table. 47 acres of rock, trees, and shoreline sitting alone in the middle of the lake, connected to the mainland only by water. A former marina site. Decommissioned, forgotten. The kind of property most people scrolled past because it didn't fit neatly into a subdivision brochure. To me, it was perfect. I wasn't a developer. I wasn't looking to flip anything. After 27 years as a dam and water control engineer, most of them spent crawling through concrete tunnels and standing knee-deep in spillways during flood season. I wanted quiet. Space. A place where water moved according to physics, not politics. The island came with a house on the hill, modern but restrained, built to withstand storms and isolation. It came with a marina that needed work, a boat ramp with old scars from years of use, and a long paper trail that ended cleanly at a recorded deed filed with the county. No HOA mentioned, no covenants attached, no easements beyond utility access clearly defined. I signed without hesitation. The morning I arrived, the lake was calm enough to look staged. My pickup sat on the ferry barge as it pulled away from the mainland, the island growing larger with each slow churn of the propeller. Pine trees lined the ridge. Rock shelves dipped into the water, clear enough that I could see shadows of fish moving below the surface. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. The first 2 days passed quietly. Too quietly, in hindsight. I walked the property line with printed surveys in my hand, matching metal markers in the ground to numbers on the page. I checked the marina slips, tested the cleats, noted where the pilings had shifted over time. The work was familiar, honest, physical, the kind that left your hands sore and your mind clear. It was on the second evening that I met Marcus. He came by in an aluminum fishing boat just as the sun was dropping behind the trees, cutting the engine a respectful distance from the dock. He was in his late 50s, weathered in the way people get when they've spent most of their lives around water. Tool belt still on, hands stained with grease and varnish. "You the new owner?" he asked. I nodded. "Remy." "Marcus," he said, tying off. "Live on the North Shore. Used to work this marina back when it was running." There was a pause then. Not awkward, calculated. "You planning on reopening it?" he asked. "Eventually," I said. "For now, just fixing what's broken." He nodded slowly, eyes drifting toward the access gate at the far end of the dock. "HOA won't like that." That was the first time the letters were spoken out loud. I asked, "Which one?" He hesitated. "Coastal Estates," he finally said. "They don't technically own anything out here, but that's never stopped them before." He didn't elaborate, no matter how casually I asked, just shook his head and pushed off, leaving a faint wake that rippled against the dock. That night, I called Sarah Mitchell. Sarah and I went back years. She was a land use attorney with a reputation for precision and an intolerance for bullies disguised as bureaucrats. When I told her the address and described the island, she went quiet longer than usual. "That property has history," she said finally. "Not criminal, not cursed, something worse. The HOAs tried to claim control over marina access points all around that lake," she continued. "They use fines, inspections, intimidation. Most owners don't have the time or money to fight. They fold." "Do they have legal standing?" I asked. She exhaled. "That depends on whether anyone actually reads the deeds." The next morning, I woke to find a flyer tucked into the gate at the top of the dock path. Glossy paper, bold lettering. A community notice about upcoming inspections and compliance reviews. No name, no statute, no signature, just assumed authority. I didn't remove it. I photographed it, logged the time, filed it away. Because engineers learn early that systems fail at their weakest assumptions. And HOAs, I'd learned, often assume no one is paying attention. By the time Bethany Reed arrived on that third morning, I wasn't surprised. Annoyed, yes, but not surprised. Standing on the dock as she listed violations that didn't exist, watching her photographer twist angles into evidence, I realized something important. This wasn't about rules. It was about pressure. and pressure only works if the structure underneath it is weak. As the helicopters thundered overhead in the present, drowning out Bethany's protests, I knew exactly where this was headed. But 3 days earlier, standing alone on the dock with the sun rising and a deed folded carefully in my pocket, I had no idea how far she was willing to push, or how badly she'd miscalculated who she was pushing. Bethany Reed returned less than 48 hours after I met Marcus. This time, she didn't come alone. The lake was calm again that morning, deceptively so. The fog burned off early, leaving the water bright and open, the kind of day that made people believe nothing bad could happen. I was tightening bolts on a dock cleat when the sound of engines cut across the surface, louder and more aggressive than before. Not one boat. 3. They approached in a loose formation, spreading out as they came closer, creating wakes that slapped hard against the pilings. The lead vessel was the same white cruiser as before. Behind it followed a smaller boat flying no flag at all, and a pontoon boat that looked hastily repurposed, its deck cluttered with equipment cases. They tied up without asking. Bethany stepped onto the dock first, pink suit again, flawless and deliberate, as if yesterday's encounter had never happened. This time she smiled wider, too wide. The kind of smile people wear when they believe the outcome is already decided. Behind her came the others, 2 board members in matching blazers, identical to the ones before. A photographer with an even larger lens, already lifting it to his eye. And then the uniforms. 2 men stepped forward wearing dark shirts, badges clipped to their chests, radios on their shoulders. At a glance, they could have passed for law enforcement. At a closer look, something was off. The badges reflected light too cleanly. The radios lacked markings. Their boots were new. They fanned out slightly, a practiced move meant to claim space. Bethany didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Cole," she said loudly, voice carrying across the marina, "we're here to document ongoing violations and enforce compliance." She gestured, and the photographer began circling immediately, snapping photos of the dock, the boats, the shoreline, the access gate. Every click felt invasive, like fingers rifling through drawers. One of the uniformed men stepped closer, close enough that I could smell cheap cologne beneath the lake air. "You'll want to cooperate," he said. "Things go easier that way." I set my wrench down slowly. Not in surrender, in control. "Under whose authority?" I asked. Bethany's smile faltered for half a second, then reset. "The Coastal Estates Homeowners Association," she said. "As previously explained." "That's not a statute," I replied. "It's a name." Her eyes hardened. She pulled out her folder again, thicker this time, and flipped it open with theatrical precision. Inside were documents meant to overwhelm: maps, diagrams, printed notices, highlighted paragraphs. She held one up, tapping it sharply. "This lake and all associated access points fall under community governance," she said, "including this marina." I took a step closer and looked. Not at the seals, not at the signatures, but at the margins. The language, the dates, the references. They were sloppy. Parcel numbers that didn't match county records. Citations to bylaws without filing stamps. A map that blurred property lines just enough to confuse someone who hadn't spent years reading surveys. I looked up at her. "These documents aren't recorded." "They don't need to be," she snapped. "You agreed when you bought property in our jurisdiction." "I didn't agree to anything," I said evenly. "And this island isn't in your jurisdiction." That was when the tone shifted. Bethany closed the folder with a sharp snap. One of the uniformed men adjusted his stance, placing himself just off my shoulder. Another stepped closer to the marina office door. "You're making this difficult," Bethany said. "We're prepared to issue fines immediately. Daily penalties, restricted access. If necessary, we'll arrange inspections. By whom? I asked. She hesitated, then gestured vaguely. Environmental, safety, structural. The photographer leaned low, angling his lens upward toward the marina office roof, framing it in a way that made it look crooked, unstable. I pulled my phone from my pocket and began recording. That did it. Bethany's voice rose. You don't have permission to record HOA proceedings. This isn't an HOA meeting, I said. This is my property. One of the uniformed men spoke again, quieter this time. You should put the phone away. I turned slightly, just enough to look directly at his badge. The serial number was wrong, the font inconsistent. What department are you with? I asked. Silence. Bethany stepped between us quickly, heels clicking sharply against the dock. That's irrelevant. You've been notified. You have 72 hours to comply. She pulled a pre-printed notice from her folder and held it out to me. My name was already typed in. The date was today. They'd come prepared. I didn't take it. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, as their boats rocked against the dock and the photographer kept shooting, something became clear. This wasn't enforcement. It was theater. Designed to scare. Designed to isolate. Designed to make resistance feel pointless. As they finally turned to leave, Bethany paused at the edge of the dock and looked back at me. You're new here, she said. You don't understand how things work yet. I watched them pull away, wakes tearing through the calm water, and felt something settle cold and steady in my chest. I understood exactly how things worked, and I knew they weren't going to stop. The calls started that night. The first one came just after sunset, when the lake had gone quiet again, and the lights along the marina slips blinked on one by one. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end was polite, practiced, and fast. Mr. Cole, this is the Architectural Review Committee with Coastal Estates. We're following up on some non-compliant structures on your property. I didn't answer right away. I listened. Engineers learn more from silence than from interruption. They cited dock rail heights, boat ramp slope ratios, environmental setbacks. Each concern sounded official until you noticed none of them referenced a statute, a code section, or a filing date. When I asked for written notice, the line went quiet for a beat, before the caller promised an email shortly. It never arrived. The second call came an hour later. Different voice, different committee, same tone. The third came the next morning, just after 7, as I was standing at the kitchen counter with the deed spread open under the light. The paper was heavier than most, archival quality, recorded cleanly with the county clerk. The parcel description ran long, wrapping carefully around the shoreline, the marina, the access road, and the narrow strip of land that connected dock to water. The strip caught my eye. I traced it with my finger, then checked the attached survey. It was narrow, barely wider than a 2-lane road, but it was continuous, unbroken. Mine. That was when I called Sarah. She arrived on the island before noon, stepping off Marcus's fishing boat with a legal pad tucked under her arm and that familiar expression on her face, the one she wore when she already suspected the answer and wanted confirmation. We sat at the kitchen table, papers spread between us, lake light pouring in through the windows. They're bluffing, she said after 10 minutes. But they're bluffing aggressively. She tapped the deed. This strip right here? This is the choke point. Without it, they don't have legal access to the marina. They can't charge fees, they can't inspect, they can't enforce anything. So why are they acting like they own it? I asked. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Because most people never check. They hear HOA and assume authority. They assume compliance is cheaper than conflict. Outside, I heard the low hum of a boat engine, then another. By the time we stepped onto the dock, 3 speedboats were circling just beyond the slips, running wide arcs that sent rolling wakes toward the pilings. The water slapped hard against the wood, rattling lines and bumpers. No one waved. No one docked. "Document everything," Sarah said quietly. The harassment escalated quickly after that. Warning notices appeared on the access gate overnight, stapled crookedly to the wood. Unapproved structure. Violation notice. The paper was cheap, the ink already bleeding from dew. I photographed each one before removing them, logging time and placement. Then the fines arrived by email. Large numbers, daily accruals, threats of liens, all referencing bylaws that didn't apply and parcels they didn't own. Marcus stopped by again that afternoon, eyes flicking toward the tree line, as if expecting someone to step out at any moment. "They're nervous," he said. "That's when they push hardest." He told me stories then, about other docks, other ramps, owners who sold after months of pressure, convinced they were in the wrong, convinced resistance would cost more than surrender. That night, Sarah and I sat back down at the table and went deeper. She pulled public records, corporate filings, financial disclosures. Patterns emerged fast. The HOA collected maintenance fees for areas it didn't maintain, paid contractors tied to shell companies, claimed oversight where none existed. "This isn't just overreach," she said finally. "It's systematic." The phone rang again while she was speaking. Same unfamiliar number, same rehearsed tone. This time they mentioned inspections scheduled for the following morning. I looked at Sarah. She nodded once. "Let them try," she said. "But don't stop them yet." Outside, the lake was calm again, moonlight stretching across it in a long silver path. Somewhere out there, Bethany Reed was planning her next move, convinced pressure would crack me the way it had cracked others. She didn't know what the deed said, and she didn't know how much evidence she was leaving behind with every call, every notice, every bluff. The first real escalation came before sunrise. I woke to the low, unsettling sound of water slapping hard against wood. Not the gentle lap of a breeze-driven ripple, but the rhythmic udar of wakes, deliberate, repeated. I stepped onto the deck and looked down toward the marina. 3 speedboats were running tight circles just beyond the slips, engines revving higher than necessary, their paths overlapping like a pattern drawn to irritate. Each pass sent a rolling wall of water into the dock. Lines snapped taut, bumpers groaned, and the planks shuddered beneath my feet. No one waved. No one slowed. When I raised my phone and began recording, one of the boats peeled closer, then cut away sharply, throwing spray high into the air. By the time the sun crested the tree line, the boats were gone. In their place, someone had left a sign. It was nailed crookedly to the access gate where the gravel path met the dock. White board, red letters still wet enough to bleed into the grain. Unapproved structure, comply, or consequences. I photographed it, close enough to capture the nailheads, the angle of the board, the timestamp on my phone. Then I removed it and set it against the boathouse wall, evidence drying in the morning light. The calls resumed an hour later. Different voices, same script. One claimed to be from an environmental committee concerned about shoreline impact. Another warned of unsafe conditions around the marina. A third mentioned imminent inspections and possible emergency enforcement. None could cite authority. None would put anything in writing. Sarah told me to log everything. So I did. Times, numbers, phrases repeated word for word across different calls. Patterns formed quickly, like a machine running a loop. By mid-morning, Marcus showed up again, this time on foot, his truck parked back from the gate. They've hired people, he said quietly. Seen them around the North Shore before. Loud engines, signs, trying to make folks feel watched. We stood together on the dock, the lake glittering deceptively peaceful around us. That afternoon, the trucks arrived. I heard them before I saw them. The grind of diesel engines, the rattle of metal over gravel. 2 flatbeds rolled down the narrow access road toward the gate, followed by a pickup with magnetic signs on the doors. Coastal Estates Maintenance. On the flatbeds sat equipment that didn't belong anywhere near routine inspections. A compact excavator, pallets of lumber, tools stacked with the efficiency of a crew expecting to work, not observe. Bethany Reed stepped out of the pickup like she owned the ground beneath her feet. Her pink suit was gone, replaced by pressed slacks and a tailored jacket in neutral tones, the uniform of someone pretending restraint. She didn't smile this time. "We're here to remove illegal structures," she announced loudly, for the benefit of the men unloading equipment and the invisible audience she assumed was watching. Final notice was given. I raised my phone again. "Under whose authority?" She gestured toward the gate. "Community authority." "That gate is on my property," I said. "So is everything beyond it." One of the workers hesitated, glancing at Bethany. Another started the excavator, its engine coughing to life, metal arm lifting slightly before settling again. Sarah arrived moments later, stepping out of Marcus's truck with a folder under her arm and a look that stopped Bethany mid-step. "You've been notified," Bethany snapped. "You're obstructing enforcement." Sarah didn't raise her voice. "You're attempting to perform construction activity on land you do not own, without permits, without recorded easements, and without statutory authority." Bethany waved her off. "We have documentation." "Which you refuse to file," Sarah replied, "and which we have already flagged." For a moment, the lake seemed to hold its breath. Then Bethany made her mistake. "Proceed," she said sharply. The excavator lurched forward, tracks grinding against gravel, bucket lowering toward the edge of the dock ramp. Wood creaked as weight shifted. A board cracked, not dramatically, but enough to be unmistakable, enough to cross a line. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I kept recording. Sarah's voice was calm beside me. "That's destruction of permitted infrastructure." Bethany turned, eyes flashing. "Stop filming!" I shook my head once. The workers froze, suddenly unsure. One killed the engine. Another set his tools down slowly. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by water slapping against the dock and the distant cry of a gull. Bethany stared at me, her control slipping just enough to show something raw underneath. "You're making this worse for yourself," she said. I looked past her, out across the lake, where the sunlight glittered like nothing had changed at all. "This is you making it worse," I replied. By the time they backed the equipment away and retreated to their trucks, the damage was done, not to the dock, but to their case. They'd crossed from intimidation into action, from paper threats into physical interference, and they'd done it on camera. As the trucks disappeared down the access road, Sarah closed her folder and met my eyes. "Now," she said quietly, "we let them keep going." Letting go is harder than pushing back. Every instinct I had, engineer, property owner, human being, wanted to stop them immediately. To chain the gate, call the sheriff, force a line in the sand. But Sarah was right. Pressure exposes itself when it believes it's working. The trick is to look like you're bending without actually breaking. So I did something that felt wrong. I stepped back. That afternoon, I sent an email to the address Bethany had used for her notices. Short, polite, non-committal. I thanked her for bringing concerns to my attention and said I needed time to review options with counsel. I asked for a temporary pause on inspections while I assessed compliance. The response came within minutes. "Understood," Bethany wrote. "We appreciate your cooperation." Appreciate was a tell, so was the speed. The calls slowed after that. Not stopped, slowed. Fewer threats, more reassurance. The tone shifted from enforcement to inevitability, like gravity doing its work. That evening, I walked the dock alone, hands in my pockets, listening to the creak of lines and the quiet hiss of water against wood. The lake looked unchanged, peaceful. But the calm felt artificial now, like the quiet in a room after raised voices leave it. Marcus stopped by just before dark. He leaned against the piling, arms crossed, watching the far shore. "They think you're folding," he said. "Good," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" I nodded. "They don't stop when you resist. They stop when they get sloppy." Sloppy came the next morning. A new notice appeared on the gate. This one laminated, official-looking, complete with a logo and a list of alleged violations. Dock setbacks, environmental buffers, unauthorized commercial use. Each line ended with a fine amount, bolded, designed to make the page feel heavy. What it didn't include was authority. No parcel reference, no statute, no recorded filing. Sarah arrived shortly after, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't look angry. She looked focused. "They're moving funds," she said. "Fast." She spread documents across the kitchen counter, pages sliding under the light. HOA financial summaries, contractor invoices, payment schedules that didn't align with any actual maintenance. "They're charging fees for access they don't own," she continued, "and paying vendors tied to shell companies. Same names show up on different lakes, different HOAs, same pattern." Outside, an engine roared briefly, then faded. I stepped onto the deck in time to see a speedboat pass by again, slower this time. Someone standing on the bow, with a phone raised, filming the house. I didn't react. Instead, I made a show of it. I called a contractor, loudly, on speaker, asking about timelines for dock repairs and security upgrades. I mentioned delays, permits, budget concerns. I wanted it overheard. I wanted the story to travel. Within an hour, Bethany's reply arrived. A formal letter this time, certified, delivered by hand to the gate. It demanded immediate cessation of all improvement activities, pending HOA approval. It threatened legal action. It warned of escalating fines. The language was stronger, sharper, edged with confidence. Sarah smiled when she read it. "They're claiming control they don't have," she said. "Every letter like this makes it worse for them." That afternoon, I did nothing. I didn't repair the dock. I didn't confront anyone. I let the lake settle back into its natural rhythm, even as tension tightened beneath the surface. Bethany took the silence as surrender. The speedboats returned at dusk, circling wider this time, music playing just loud enough to carry across the water. Laughter drifted over the lake. Someone shouted something I couldn't quite make out. I stayed inside, lights low, camera recording quietly through the window. At exactly 9 o'clock, another email arrived. "We expect full compliance by Monday," Bethany wrote. "Failure to do so will result in direct intervention." Direct. Sarah read it twice, then looked at me. "They're about to overplay," she said. "People like this always do." That night I slept lightly, listening to the wind in the trees and the soft knock of water against stone. I wasn't worried, because everything they were doing, every call, every letter, every pass of a boat, was building a record they couldn't erase. And in the morning, they were going to take the next step. They did. It started just after 8, when the sun was already high enough to burn off the last of the mist and turn the lake into a flat sheet of blue glass. I was standing at the kitchen counter, coffee untouched, when Sarah's car pulled up at the top of the access road. She came in without knocking, jacket already off, phone pressed to her ear. "They're accelerating," she said, covering the receiver, "which means something's spooking them." She spread a stack of papers across the counter. Bank records this time. Not deeds or surveys. Numbers. Transfers. Dates highlighted in yellow. Look at the timing, she said. Every time an owner resists, fees spike. Emergency assessments. Special maintenance charges. And then, she tapped a column with her pen. Payments go out to contractors who don't actually do work. I leaned over the counter, studying the names. They repeated across different lakes, different HOAs, same mailing addresses, same bank routing numbers. Shells. They're laundering HOA money, I said. Sarah nodded. And more than that, they're using marina access as leverage. Once they control the choke point, they force sales, below market, quietly. The island suddenly made sense. It wasn't just a property. It was a keystone. Control the marina. Control who comes and goes. Control who pays. Control who leaves when the pressure becomes unbearable. The strip of land on my deed, the narrow access they pretended not to see, was the last piece they didn't own. Outside, an engine roared. We stepped onto the deck in time to see a small convoy approaching. Bethany's white cruiser leading, followed by 2 workboats towing barges. On the barges sat equipment wrapped in tarps, heavy shapes, unmistakable even from a distance. They're bringing machines again, I said. And witnesses, Sarah replied, nodding toward a camera mounted on one of the boats. They want documentation, their version of it. The boats tied up without ceremony. Bethany stepped onto the dock wearing her practiced confidence, flanked by board members and the same uniformed men as before. This time, she didn't smile at all. We're here to take control of the marina, she announced, voice loud, rehearsed. Effective immediately. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I stepped aside. That surprised her. You've had ample notice, she continued, watching my face for resistance. Your non-compliance leaves us no choice. I nodded once. I need 30 minutes, I said, to collect personal property from the dock. Her eyes narrowed. Then she smiled, slow, satisfied. Make it quick, she said. After that, this area is restricted. She turned away, already issuing orders, already convinced the pressure had finally worked. Sarah leaned close. She thinks she's won, she whispered. Good, I said. The equipment rolled forward, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Workers in reflective vests began marking areas with spray paint. One pointed toward the marina office. Another gestured at the dock ramp. I kept recording, quietly, steadily. Behind the scenes, Sarah moved faster. She stepped away, phone to her ear, speaking in low, precise sentences. County offices, financial crimes, marine authority, names and account numbers passed like coordinates. Within minutes, her phone buzzed again. They've been waiting for this, she said when she returned. Your island isn't the first complaint. It's the cleanest. Bethany's voice cut through the air then, sharp and commanding. Begin removal. The first machine lurched forward, tracks biting into gravel. Wood groaned as weight shifted. A piling creaked under strain. I didn't stop them. I let them cross the line. As the bucket scraped against the dock edge, sending splinters into the water, Bethany turned toward me, triumph flashing briefly across her face. This didn't have to be difficult, she said. I met her gaze, calm, unmoved. No, I replied. It didn't. Behind her, the lake remained deceptively peaceful, sunlight glittering across the surface. Boats drifted, gulls circled. To anyone watching from a distance, it might have looked like routine work on a private marina. But beneath that calm, the truth had finally surfaced. The island wasn't the prize. It was the trap. The excavator's engine settled into a low, confident growl, the kind that suggested permanence. Its steel arm lifted, joints hissing softly, then lowered again as the operator adjusted his angle. Fresh paint marks glared against the dock planks, arrows and lines that turned my marina into a diagram for removal. Bethany Reed stood with her hands on her hips, watching the work begin as if she were supervising a landscaping project. Her voice carried cleanly over the water now, sharp and authoritative, every word chosen to sound final. "Start with the ramp," she said. "That's the priority." The operator hesitated for just a second, glancing toward me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply kept my phone steady, framing the dock, the machine, the men, and Bethany herself in a single continuous shot. The bucket scraped forward. Wood protested with a dry, cracking sound that seemed too loud for the open air. A plank shifted, then split along an old seam, sending a thin spray of splinters into the water. Ripples spread outward, distorting the reflections of the boats and the sky. That sound, wood giving way, hit harder than any shouted threat had before. Marcus stood a few yards behind me, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. Sarah remained perfectly still, eyes locked on the machine, lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't watching the damage. She was watching the moment. Bethany turned toward me again, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. "You can still stop this," she said. "Sign the compliance agreement. Transfer control. We'll make this easy." I shook my head once. "No," I said. The excavator pulled back and surged forward again. Another board gave way. The ramp sagged, not catastrophically, but enough to leave no doubt. This was no inspection. This was destruction. I raised my voice, not in anger, but in clarity. "This dock is permitted infrastructure," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are performing unauthorized demolition on private property." Bethany laughed, short and dismissive. "We've been over this." "Yes," I replied. "And you were wrong then too." Sarah stepped forward now, phone pressed to her ear, speaking calmly into it as if ordering lunch. "We have active interference with recorded property," she said. "Equipment on site, names and plates documented." She paused, listening, then nodded once. "Yes, I'll hold." Bethany's smile wavered. The second machine started up, its engine roaring to life, exhaust puffing into the clear air. Workers began unloading tools, sledgehammers, pry bars, placing them neatly on the dock like instruments laid out before a procedure. That was when I made the call Bethany didn't expect. I didn't dial the sheriff. I didn't call the media. I called the Marine Authority. "Unauthorized construction activity on navigable waters," I said when the line connected. "Active obstruction of permitted access. I have live video and documentation." There was a pause on the other end, then a question, then another. Behind me, the lake shifted as a patrol boat altered course in the distance, its wake changing shape. Bethany noticed it at the same moment I did. Her head snapped toward the open water, eyes narrowing. "Ignore that," she said quickly, to no one in particular. "Keep working." But the confidence was gone now, replaced by something brittle. The excavator operator hesitated again. One of the workers lowered his tool slowly, looking between Bethany and the water. I kept recording. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher. Sweat darkened collars. The machines idled, engines still running but no longer advancing. Uncertainty spread quietly, like a crack traveling through ice. Then the sound arrived. Not the thud of machinery, not the slap of water. Rotors. At first, it was distant. A low vibration felt more than heard. Then it grew rapidly until the air itself seemed to thicken. Shadows raced across the dock. The machines, Bethany's rigid posture. She looked up. Color drained from her face as the first helicopter crested the tree line, sunlight flashing off its body. Another followed, and another. The lake responded instantly, waves lifting and rolling under the sudden pressure. Loose papers skittered across the dock. Spray whipped into the air. A voice cut through the chaos, amplified, unmistakable. All activity cease immediately. Bethany stood frozen, pink and gray and steel locked in a frame she couldn't escape. For the first time since this began, she said nothing at all. The helicopters settled into position with deliberate precision, not hovering wildly, but holding steady, disciplined, their rotors beating the air into submission. The sound wasn't panic-inducing anymore. It was authoritative, controlled, final. The kind of sound that tells everyone present exactly who is in charge. A patrol boat cut across the marina mouth and throttled down hard, its bow lifting briefly before slapping back into the water. Another followed, then a third, forming a loose perimeter that boxed in Bethany's cruiser and the workboats still tethered to the dock. Engines idled. Lines went slack. Uniformed officers moved with calm efficiency. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They walked. Boots hit the dock in a steady rhythm, the wood creaking under unfamiliar weight. One officer approached the excavator first, signaling the operator to shut it down. The engine coughed once, then fell silent. Another officer spoke quietly to the workers, directing them to step back and keep their hands visible. No one argued. Bethany found her voice then, sharp and strained. "This is a civil matter," she snapped, forcing her shoulders back. "You're interfering with HOA enforcement." An officer turned toward her slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't match her energy. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you are overseeing unauthorized construction activity on navigable waters and permitted infrastructure. We're here to secure the site." She scoffed, the sound brittle. "You don't understand. This property—" "I do understand," he replied, cutting her off without aggression. "And you'll have an opportunity to explain your position. Right now, step away from the equipment." Bethany hesitated. For just a moment, it looked like she might refuse, like she might try to argue authority into existence one last time. Her eyes darted to her board members, to the uniformed men who had stood so confidently earlier. They wouldn't meet her gaze. One by one, they stepped back. Sarah moved to my side, her phone still in her hand, screen glowing with messages and timestamps. "They're logging everything," she murmured. "Chain of custody. Financials are already flagged." I nodded, still recording, still silent. An officer approached me next. "Sir, are you the property owner?" "I am," I said, handing over my ID. He checked it, then nodded. "We've received documentation confirming your deed and permits. We're securing the dock and marina pending further review." Bethany's head snapped toward me. "You went behind my back," she hissed. I met her eyes calmly. "I followed the law." The words landed harder than any insult could have. As officers began photographing the site, spray-painted markings, damaged planks, the position of the machinery, Bethany's posture changed. The rigid confidence she'd worn like armor began to sag. Her voice rose again, faster now, less controlled. "This is harassment," she insisted. "You're siding with him because he called first." An officer shook his head slightly. "We're here because we received evidence." That word, evidence, hung in the air. One of the men who'd worn a badge earlier shifted nervously as an officer examined it, turning it over, checking the serial number. Another worker stared at the water, jaw tight, as questions were asked quietly, methodically. The marina felt smaller now, boxed in by authority that didn't need to posture. Bethany's cruiser was boarded next. 2 officers stepped aboard, checking documentation, registration, ownership. Clipboards appeared. Photos were taken. Notes were made. Bethany watched it all, helpless. I felt the tension that had coiled in my chest for days begin to loosen. Not rush out, not explode, but release slowly, like pressure venting through a valve. This wasn't victory, not yet. This was the turn. As the last helicopter shifted position, casting one final shadow across the dock, Bethany looked at me again. Her eyes were wide now, no longer furious, but calculating. "This isn't over," she said. I believed her, but for the first time since she'd arrived on my island, her words carried no weight at all. The next weeks moved quietly, but relentlessly. The marina was sealed pending review, not by the HOA, but by county and marine authorities acting under clear jurisdiction. Red tags hung from the equipment Bethany had brought in, fluttering in the wind like small, silent verdicts. The damaged planks were documented, measured, photographed, and left exactly as they were, evidence preserved rather than erased. Bethany tried to regain ground immediately. Letters arrived from her attorneys, thick with language meant to intimidate. Claims of misunderstanding, assertions of implied authority, accusations that I had escalated unnecessarily. Sarah read each one carefully, marked them with notes, and filed them away. "They're still playing offense," she said. "That usually means they're afraid of what's coming." What came was slower and far more devastating. Depositions followed. Financial records were subpoenaed. Contractors were questioned, quietly at first, then with increasing urgency. Patterns Sarah had suspected became impossible to ignore once viewed in sequence. Inflated fees, recycled invoices, payments routed through the same accounts regardless of location. The HOA's board began to fracture. 2 members resigned within a week, citing personal reasons. Another stopped returning calls entirely. The uniformed men Bethany had relied on disappeared from the picture altogether. Bethany herself grew quieter. When the hearing date was set, she arrived in a conservative suit, hair pulled back, expression carefully neutral. The room was small, utilitarian. No drama, no theatrics. Just desks, documents, and the hum of fluorescent lights. She spoke when invited, carefully, selectively. Sarah spoke next. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. She laid out the record piece by piece, the deed, the survey, the access strip, the notices that lacked authority, the calls logged, the equipment brought without permits, the financial transfers that didn't align with maintenance or repairs. By the time she finished, the room felt different. Not tense. Settled. The ruling didn't come that day. It didn't need to. Within a month, Coastal Estates Homeowners Association was formally dissolved pending further investigation. Its accounts were frozen. Its authority suspended. A trustee was appointed to unwind years of improper enforcement and return funds where possible. Bethany Reed resigned before she was removed. The marina reopened under county oversight, then fully under my control once the final approvals were issued. Repairs were made slowly, deliberately, with permits posted clearly for anyone to see. The access gate received a new sign, not aggressive, not boastful. Private property, no HOA authority. Marcus stopped by the morning it went up, coffee in hand, nodding once when he read it. "About time," he said. Life returned to a quieter rhythm. Boats came and went. The water settled back into its familiar patterns. Gulls reclaimed their perches. The island felt like an island again. Not a battleground, not a prize, just a place. I never heard from Bethany Reed after that. I heard about her, of course. Everyone did. Whispers at first. Then confirmed reports, civil actions, ongoing investigations, the quiet unraveling of a system that had relied too long on fear and assumption. Standing on the dock one evening, watching the sun sink into the lake, I thought back to her first words to me. "You don't understand how things work here." She had been wrong. I understood exactly how things worked. Power that isn't real has to shout. It has to rush. It has to pretend. Real authority doesn't announce itself. It arrives with paperwork, patience, and the truth, and it doesn't leave room for argument. If you've ever had an HOA or anyone else try to push you around on your own land, drop a yes in the comments. I'd really like to hear your story. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about being loud. It's about being patient and knowing the truth will hold. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing and staying with the channel. There are more real stories of land, law, and hard-earned justice still to come.